give a little bit of background of our speaker today. So basically, Mr. Haris is a Google developer expert for Flutter. He's also an instructor at Learn Flutter Code. And surprisingly, he's also a Flutter enthusiast. If you can't tell, this is a Flutter session. Yeah. And other than that, Mr. Haris also provides Flutter videos on YouTube. All right, so everyone, let us welcome Mr. Haris to continue doing that.
So thank you guys for joining me on this late of a night, 8 p.m. So selamat malam, okay? Thank you guys for joining me. And today, if you guys don't know, we're going to learn some Flutter, all right? So I have some slides that I've prepared for you guys. So you guys can go to this URL. So I'm just going to copy this URL and paste it inside the chat group. You guys can follow along this workshop tutorial, and I will try my best to be as slow as possible because I think a lot of us are not like prepared to learn at this late of a time. Or not, maybe, I don't know, we are coders, right? We code day and night or night, I don't know, all day, every day. Okay, yeah, you can go to the website and then you can follow along with me. All right, so yes, late night coders. Okay, so let me introduce myself again. Thank you, Daniel, for introducing me. So I am a Google developer expert. If you don't know what is a Google developer expert, think of it as an influencer for Google. So Google don't pay me. I'm just like a free influencer, but I mean, I have certain benefits as well. I'm also an instructor and the founder for Learn Flutter Code. So it's my own company that I've created. So basically what we do is we create easy to understand Flutter content for developers. So like this workshop or like my YouTube channel or newsletter or courses that I have. So basically education in Flutter, right? So if we were to turn back time 1 year ago, I was a Flutter developer in a startup called Blood. So it's a feminine tech company. Basically, what they do is that they have a product that is a heat pad for menstrual pain. So the app side of the startup is that we do a period tracker. So if you are a female and you probably have some sort of like tracking periods for guys, yes, there is such thing called period tracking app. So I was a Flutter developer there, and currently it has 100,000 downloads in the App Store and Play Store combination. I think 100,000 downloads in Google Play. Yeah. So I managed to scale up to that amount of downloads. Okay, so that's just me for now. Then we are going to proceed to what is Flutter, right? So Flutter, if you guys don't know, is Google's UI toolkit or framework for building beautiful, natively compiled applications for mobile, web, desktop from a single code base. So you have one code base and then you can build it for many platforms, right? Mobile, web, desktop, and then you can do it for, I think, like smart devices such as like, you know, those like smart watches or smart clocks. Flutter can be used for that as well. Recently, someone has published an app that's able to be run on an Xbox as well. Yeah. So Flutter is trying to, you know, like conquer different platforms slowly but surely. Flutter is a framework, so its programming language is Dart. So Dart is also created by Google, and statistics have shown that it is the #1 fastest growing language in 2019, last year, under the GitHub Octover's kind of event. So Dart has been published 9 years ago, but it became popular due to Flutter. So if you guys have some experience in programming, Dart will be easier for you to pick up. If you don't have a lot of experience, Dart is still manageable, but as any newbie, as I was once, when you're learning programming, it's difficult at the start. So, but if you have prior experience, Dart programming language is pretty okay to learn, whether you learn JavaScript, Python, or Java. Then lastly, Flutter, this is some statistic for you to get excited. It is the 6th most popular open source GitHub project. So I think like the first few ones are the web frameworks like Vue or React. So Flutter is number 6, and it's only one position behind Linux. So that's pretty cool. So I mean, this is in terms of like stars in GitHub. So that's why it's the 6th most popular GitHub project. And then there's over 100,000 100,000 apps shipped to the Google Play Store. So if you were to, look through the details of an app inside the Play Store, you can actually see what kind of like framework is being used. So for example, I never put a slide about like popular apps that's built in Flutter. So I think one popular app that you guys might or might not heard of. So in Singapore, it's pretty popular now. It's called Google Play Singapore, Google Pay Singapore. So you have like online transactions, right? You can use Google Pay to pay stuff. So Google Pay is built in Flutter because I'm from Singapore. So I used it on my iPhone and yeah, it's pretty good. A lot of people liked it, not because of the app, because the cashback is insane. But anyway, that's not the point. But the point is that even Google themselves is using Flutter to build stuff, right? Then other than Flutter, there's other companies such as Alibaba who's using Flutter as well to build their apps. And there is BMW, there is other big companies as well. eBay also using Flutter for their motors sales of their app. All right, so now this is certain expectations for you to know about this workshop, right? So since I assume that a lot of you guys don't know Flutter or may heard of Flutter before, you guys are not like experienced Flutter developers. So there will be a lot of explaining rather than doing. So if you guys are following along, great. If you're not following along, then just listen up, don't get bored. But it's a lot of explaining because Flutter, like a framework itself, there's a lot of things that need to be explained so that you understand how Flutter works and how you can build a mobile app or a website even. So there's a lot of explaining, very few doing and such. So for me personally, because I teach students, whether it's online or offline coding, right? I rather have people understand the concept rather than building something from the start. Because when you see certain things, you question, why is this like this? Why is it like that? So that's where I'm heading towards in this workshop. There is parts where you can code out as well, but I'm going to explain more than doing. So it's like 60% explaining, 30% doing, and the last 10% confused. All right, so now today we're going to build. So I had a last minute change. So initially I wanted to build or teach you guys how to build a to-do app. But then I realized a to-do app under an hour and 30 minutes is not really good. So the structure of this workshop is that at the first part, which is a lot of explaining, second part is a lot of explaining and doing, and then the last 30 minutes will be Q&A, because I think a lot of you guys have questions about Flutter, like in terms of jobs, in terms of like opportunities out there, in terms of a lot of things that you guys want to know about Flutter. So I think the last 30 minutes will be great. At the same time, can you also ping me if I'm left with like 1 hour or 45 minutes in the chat so that I don't exceed 2 hours, because I know you guys want to sleep or continue your work. I don't know. Okay, so we're going to build a counter app. So a counter app is pretty simple. You just increase the number from 0 to whatever. And then at the same time, hopefully, if there is time, you can also decrease the number as well. So it's a simple app. You increase the number and decrease the number. So this is how it looks like. You're going to not use the emulator because I think you guys are just learning Flutter. So we're going to create counter app from scratch. That means like the first line of code. What's the first line of code? That kind of thing. So at least you guys know how to expect when you build a Flutter app in the future if you guys want to. So if you guys want to follow along, you can go to dartpad.dev/Flutter. So this is where it is an online platform that allows you to build Flutter without you downloading the SDK or going through the different steps. So at least you guys can follow along. So I'll give you guys like maybe, let me see, 1 minute to go to this website, and it will look something like this. I'm using a Brave browser. So you can go to dartpad.dev/Flutter. Let me just put the link inside so you guys can follow along. Oh, thank you to put the link. All right. So it looks something like this. It is a very simple app that you have. Now it's 8:19. Let's go through the first line of code. So the first line of code, if you guys can see inside Dartpad, right, is this import statement. So the first line of code in Flutter is called an import statement. So Flutter is an SDK. If you guys don't know what's SDK, basically it's a package for you to use or library for you to use the different components that's available, right? So Flutter itself uses, it's a package itself, and then there is this file that is called material.dart. So the first few words is import package. So that's the import syntax. Then the second word is the folder name, which is Flutter. And then lastly, you're going to import the file material.dart. So usually when you create a Flutter app, you usually will have this import statement. Yes, software development kit. Thank you so much. Oh my God, I forgot. Yes, SDK. Thank you so much. All right, so you guys are smart, man. So the first statement is the import statement, which is Flutter material.dart. Then the next statement, right, would be this. All right, so before that, right, I want you guys to go to your Dart pad and remove everything except for the import statement. So at least you guys know how or what to type, right? So just remove everything except for the import statement. So at least like this workshop, we are able to create from scratch. Hopefully you guys be able to catch up with the workshop. All right. So once you delete the import statement, because the default app is not really something that I want to go through. So the next one that I want to go through is this thing called this void main run app my app function. So this main function, right, is actually an entry point to a Flutter or a Dart app. So in any Flutter or Dart app, you will see this main function, and is the function that you usually use in order for you to run an app. I think for Node or a JavaScript file, you probably type in Node and then the file name. Then for Dart, you can do that. I think you type in run or something like that. I forgot. Oh my God. Okay, I'm not. Yeah. So for Flutter, you probably need to use this main function. And then inside this main function, you will need this second function, which is called the run app function. So the run app function is found inside the import package library. So the main function is found in any Flutter or Dart package, but for the run app function is found inside the material library or the Flutter SDK. So the run app function inflates a given widget and attach it to the screen. So your main function is just like a start button for the app. Then the run app is basically telling the Flutter app what to do. So the run app basically say, okay, I'm going to use a widget and attach it to a screen. So the screen can refer to a website, it can refer to a desktop screen, it can refer to a mobile screen. But then what is this word that you might not heard of? So this is called, yes, similar to the, yes. This word that you guys might, first time that you see is called a widget. So what are widgets? So widgets are UI components or user interface components, such as your buttons or images or text fields and many, many more, right? So inside HTML, CSS, you have like your paragraph tags or your text field tags or your button tags. So widgets are just Google's way of saying that's UI components, basically. So like in React, it is called components. In like HTML, CSS, you call it UI components or tags. I don't know. So widgets are just a fancy way to say this is UI components that we use. So inside your run app function, you will require a widget, right? So then you might ask yourself, how do you create a widget? So this is where your fundamentals of coding comes in. You have to create a class. So the class name can be any name. So widget will have a name itself. So I will create a widget called my app. And then we are going to extend it to a stateless widget. So we're going to use inheritance from the OOP or object-oriented programming concept. So inside the Flutter library, there is this thing called a stateless widget. So once you extend the stateless widget, or once you inherited the stateless widget object, then you have created a widget. So this is your first UI component that you have created, right? So then you would ask, what are stateless widgets? Good question. So stateless widget, let's break down the question itself. What is this word state, right? So what state to me is a temporary storage of data. So there is like different types of data, right? There is like database. So data that is like might be permanently changed or not permanently stored like inside a database. But for like state inside a framework or a UI framework is usually stored temporarily. So with this widget is a user interface that does not store any data, but rather show it. So like your button, it just shows you a button. Then your text, it will just show you the text, but it doesn't store any data or it doesn't change from anything. It just shows, right? So an example that we're going to do, this is just like a counter app. So if you were to click on the button, right, then the widget that is going to change or the component that we are going to change is the number, right? So the 0 will become 1. So it's like a simple overview of what we're going to do. Will be comprising of mainly 3 widgets that we're going to build. So the first one is a text widget. Even though it changes from 0 to 1, it doesn't store the state. It is just showing what is being sent to the text widget. So the second one is a button widget. So it's just receiving a tab from a user. So it doesn't really store any state. But then where does the state or the number comes from, right? It comes from the app widget itself, which is a stateful widget. So then the difference between the stateless and stateful widget is basically one stores data and the other one doesn't store data. So that's the difference between a stateless widget and a stateful widget. So in Flutter, there's only 2 types of widgets, stateless and stateful. Hopefully you guys understand. If you don't, just put any question inside the chat so that we can have a Q&A. Right. So now once you roughly know what is stateless and stateful widget, this is like very simplified. It is not the actual definition of stateless and stateful, but it is very simplified so that at least you know what you are building, right? So now to create a widget, as we have gone through so far, we require a stateless widget. So then inside the stateless widget object in the Flutter library, right, we also inherit some of their methods. So we will require this build method over here. So the syntax might not look very familiar to you, but let me go through it as simple as possible. So there is this thing called override, at override. So inside the stateless widget object, you will have a build method over here, but you want to override the default method. So then you will use this syntax called at override, and you override the stateless widget default build method. So this will return widget object. So it's just a normal widget object that basically renders. And then it gives us this build context inside the argument. So also a very simple like definition, a build context is basically the position of this widget inside this whole app. So I think that's good enough. I'm not going to explain. And lastly, inside this build method, we are going to return a widget that we are going to build. So this material app over here is a widget that is available inside the Flutter library. So we don't have to build it from scratch. So it is like a do you call it oxymoron? Like when I say from scratch, right? It's not really from scratch to like the 0 and 1s of bytes, like or even like the low level code. This is like Flutter. Why is it so good? Is because it gives us the necessary widgets or UI components out of the box. So you don't have to figure out how to build, for example, a button. In Flutter, a button is already available for you, and it's also not the default ugly looking button, but it is the nice looking button. And then you might have a question, what is this material app, right? So a material app widget is a convenient widget or widget that's convenient that wraps a number of widgets that are commonly required for material design applications. So think of this material app widget is like the base of your app. So basically inside this material app widget, you have your routes. So you can go to different screens, and then you have your theme as well. So it encapsulates or it actually collects all the different use cases that an app will require. So you need different screens. All right, I have routes for you. You need a theme for your whole of your buttons and your text fields and your text we got for you. So Material App is like the base for the app. So you don't have to worry about creating anything from scratch. this is commonly used at the start. So as you can see over here, right, it's usually at the start of your building of your material app widget. So then you might be thinking also, what is this thing called material design? So if you don't know what material design is actually a design system that is created by Google. So Google has its own design, material design. Apple has its own design. I forgot what is it called. I think, is it called Cupertino design? I forgot. So this system allows us to not worry about the design as developers, because sometimes developers, we care about code rather than the design. And then we don't want to, create from scratch because it's going to take a long time, right? That's why it gives all of these widgets, right, or these UI components out of the box. So you have your buttons, you have your snack bar, you have your app bar. So your app bar is this page title over here. You have your chip over here. Everything build it for you without you even, like creating from scratch. So that's the great thing about Flutter, is that it gives all of these widgets for you to play around with. So when you want to create a simple MVP or minimum viable product to test your ideas, or basically test your ideas by building an app, right? You don't have to like create from scratch, So you could say that material library is something like a bootstrap for an app. Yeah. So that's the thing about material design. Since Flutter is built by Google, and therefore material design is being the first kind of design system that you probably have to adopt and learn. And if you want to learn Cupertino design, you can. So Flutter also gives Cupertino design also out of the box. So you don't have to worry about thinking on how you want to build an iOS app from Flutter, because it's already available for you as well. So inside this, my app widget, right? Then inside this material app widget over here, you will have this theme parameter that you can pass in the theme data. So to set the app's theme, you can just pass in this theme data, and then you will have this thing called primary swatch. So primary swatch is basically like the overall color theme for your app. You will have to use the basic color, for example, like yellow, blue, red, orange, or whatsoever, so that you don't have to worry all of the different color theming. Like Flutter does it for you, so you don't have to think about what colors you need to put in as well. But if you want to do your own design, you can definitely override different colors also. So usually you have this theme, so you can play around. So for me, what I will do, I'll just copy this whole thing. Okay, so enough explaining. I'm going to go to dartpad.dev. And then we're going to type in, hope you guys remember what to type in. So we're going to type in the main function. And then we're going to type in the run app. So inside the Dartpad, you have the suggestion of the different words that you usually type in inside your IDE. For example, your VS Code or your Android Studio or your Xcode or whatever, right? So for Dartpad, you have this functionality. So if you were to type run and then you press Control space, it will give you the different suggestions for you to choose. So we're going to use run app. If you want to use a function or a method, make sure that you have a semicolon at the end. And then if you were to go to the slides, so there's this copy button over here, and then you can paste it below. All right. So you don't have to type down. Yes, Haris, wow, you thought of everything. Yes, I did. Okay, so then after that, to use a widget, you will have to create an instance of the class. So basically, an instance is basically like a simple copy of the class that you have created. So I have created my app widget over here, of an instance of the my app widget over here using the brackets over here. All right, so if you were to run this, you should have nothing. You should have a script error, right? If you have Flutter on your IDE, then can Cappuccino be used in Android app? Yes, Cappuccino design can be used in Android app. So Flutter is not like very strict on a certain design. So you will have your run app widget running my app widget, and then you just have your my app widget over here. So the error, sadly for Dartpad, the error is not very, like, it's not very useful. It just says script error, which is something annoying. So that's, yeah, it's not really nice, but it's okay. So we are just missing one thing, but before that, we learned how to create stateless widgets. Now we want to learn how to create a stateful widget. So to create a stateful widget, it's a little bit more code, but basically this code allows us to control the state. So the first part over here, we're going to create my home page. And to create a stateful widget, we will need to extend the stateful widget object that is available in the Flutter library. Then we will have to override it, or we will have to override the create state method to a state object that we create. So Dartpad sadly doesn't have like a way for you to create a stateful widget easily. But if you have your own IDE like a VS Code, there's like a shortcut for you to create a stateful widget. But basically, this is the boilerplate for you to create a stateful widget. So other than extending a stateful widget, you need to extend the state. So this is where you can control the state of your widget. So this is automatically created inside the different IDEs like Android Studio and Visual Studio Code. So they will create this my home page state. So they will take the name of your stateful widget and then they will add the word state so that this object or class over here refers to the state of the stateful widget. And then this state over here is referring to your my home page widget. And then inside your states, you have the normal build method over here with the override syntax. So once you have created this, right, then we are going to return a widget that we want. So the widget that we want after we create our material app widget is we want to have a scaffold widget. So what is a scaffold widget? So a scaffold widget is a material design, again, a visual layout structure that helps create, like for example, the app bar and floating action button. So the app bar over here is, if you guys look closely, is this my to do over here. So the app bar has like the title, and then you can add other stuff like your buttons on the left and right. But for now, we are just gonna create a simple app bar with a title. And then for the floating action button over here, it is also created under the app bar widget. So one more thing that I did not tell you guys is that if you guys go to the slides and if you were to go to the title, right, it's actually clickable. So if you want more information about any like widgets and such, hopefully I've added all of the different links to the different widgets. So inside like the documentation of this, so this is a documentation of Flutter. It will explain further what a widget is. So for example, a scaffold class, let me zoom in for you guys. Zoom in. Okay, so inside the class, you will have like what's the explanation is all about. And then you will have the app over here. So then you will have like a embedded Dart pad for you to play around with as well, so that you don't have to like go to your IDE and run it. You have like a playground for you to run like different widgets. So they will tell you what each widget is about. Yeah, so I think the documentation of Flutter is also a little bit, what do you call that? A lot of explanation, I would say. Yeah, it's not like very plain old documentation where it's just all text. You have different things that you can, play around with. So let me go back here and let me put it full screen. All right, so the scaffold widget, think of it as like the structure for a simple material design app. Yeah, so the material app is basically the base for you to create the behind the scenes like your routes and the different theming. So the scaffold widget is more towards like where the widgets are being placed, right? So the app bar is on top and then the floating action button is at the bottom right, all right? So once we have created the my home page widget, then we will have added these two things, which is the app bar and the floating action button over here. So the scaffold over here has the app bar parameter. So you pass in this app bar widget that has the title and then the text widget here. So the app bar over here will require something to render. So you have your title and then your text widget. So the text widget over here will only require a string, and then it will just render this text widget inside the app bar. So for example, like my to-do over here is what is being rendered. And then the next thing is this floating action button parameter over here. So this floating action button requires a widget where it is a floating action button. So I think it's like very straightforward, right? You have your floating action button. Yes, it requires a floating action button widget. So it requires two parameters. The first one is the onPress parameter. and the second one is the child parameter. So the on-press parameter basically requires an anonymous function. So what is an anonymous function? It is basically this thing. So anonymous function is a function that doesn't have a name. So usually a function will have a name, right? For example, like if you were to go back here, a function will have a name and then a return type, right? But for an anonymous function in Flutter, it is as simple as this. So in any like on-press parameter, you can just pass in an anonymous function, or you can even pass in a null value. So the child parameter over here, it doesn't require an icon. It requires a widget. So usually people will put in an icon widget. So the icon widget requires an asset. So icons.add is an asset that is found inside the Flutter material library. So the icons that add, right, is something that you don't have to download. It's already inside. So that's the cool thing or the productive thing about Flutter is that you don't even have to like, import, for example, a famous font, a famous icon library is Font Awesome. So you don't have to add the package or the library inside it. Flutter has it for you. So Flutter has its own icons library, which is called material icons. The icons that you're using inside Flutter is material icons. And it also has cappuccino icons as well. So a text widget is a very simple widget. You just display a string of text with a single style. So you can put a single line, dotted line, a squiggly line, a colored line, even a stroke as well, right? So it is very similar to any text component you see out there. Then the next one is the icon widget. Like I said earlier, all of these are material icon widgets. So you don't have to import any icon packages from the get-go. So you can literally just create an app without downloading any package other than Flutter, right? So you just need a Flutter and everything is provided for you. So this is the whole My Home page widget that we are going to create. So like I say, easy, just copy, go to your Dart pad, and then paste it below over here. Hopefully there's no error. Okay, at the same time, right, because at first I was doing a to-do list app, then I realized that the to-do list app, I think it's a little bit hard and it will take quite some time for me to explain clearly. So that's why I changed it to a counter app. So let's change the text widget to a counter app string, right? So change it to a counter app string. And I think that's about it. Yeah. So just paste and then just change the counter app string over here. Yeah. So I'll probably have to change this text over here as well. Yeah. So I'll put that in my to-do list. So once you have copy and pasted your My Home page widget inside it and change the text string or the data inside it, the next thing is we want to pass this My Home page over here. Let me cancel this into our My App widget over here. So this material app only shows the theme data, but doesn't show anything, any child widget or any widget that is inside this My App widget. So what we're going to do is we are going to pass our My Home page widget into this parameter called home. The home parameter is basically the first screen that will show in your material app. So it's the same as the home screen of a website or home screen of a desktop app or whatever. So my home page widget, let's copy this. So highlight the home parameter and my home page. And then let's go back to our Dart pad. And then right under our theme parameter, let's paste our home parameter with my home page widget over here. All right, so I think we have a working app because there's no error, I assume. And let's run it. And then if you were to run this, it takes a while. Okay, so Dartpad, right, it's not the fastest environment out there. So you really have to be patient, but it's the only one, sadly. So it will slowly render this app and let's run this. So once you have rendered it, right, then it will look something like this. So you will have your app bar on top, and then it says counter app over here. And then you have a clickable floating action button. Hi, Haris, you're not sharing the Dart pad. I don't know how to share a Dart pad, but yeah, that's a good question. So basically, for those who came in late, so you go to the Flutter, the slides, and then I have the whole of the code over here. So this is like the whole code. You can just literally copy and paste. Yeah. You're not presenting the dartpad. Oh, I'm not presenting the dartpad. Oh, sorry, my bad. Okay, let me. Okay, so sorry. All right, so apologies on that again. So can you guys see my dartpad now? Yeah. So okay, cool. All right, I'm so sorry about that. I did not present the whole screen. All right, so once you have all of the code over here, so I have the answer sheet inside the slides. So it's just right underneath my home page over here. So if you were to scroll through all the way down, you'll see this whole thing. So you can literally just copy and then go to your dartpad and paste it. And then you can just change the My To Do into a counter app over here. And then you run this. And then it will look something like this. Yes. All right. So you have your counter app bar over here, and it's yellow color. And then you have this icons.add. So you can play around with the colors. So for example, I want indigo. Or if you don't know what colors to play with, right? You just remove everything except for the colors dot dot, right? And then you press Control Space and you can see all of the different colors that you can play around with. So the colors that you can play around with are not the accent over here, but the different like single word color. So for example, if you want to put, let's say indigo, right? Then if you were to run this, then it will change the color for the app bar and the button itself. And then at the same time, another thing that you can play around is the different icons that's available inside the icons, what do you call that, library. So icons, there's a lot of icons. So it will actually take some time for you to load all of the different icons. Will it destroy my dartpad? I didn't. Okay, no, it didn't. Yeah, so you can see all of the different icons that's available inside the material icons library. So there's a lot of things that is already available for you without you even thinking about it. So that's the cool thing about Flutter. All right, so once we have created like the skeleton of the app, the next thing is that we are going to finally create a counter app. So now inside my home page, right, we are going to create a centered text. So the best thing about Flutter is that, you know, there's this joke where the hardest thing in HTML and CSS is to center a div. Well, in Flutter, we solved that for you. We literally created a widget that's called center to center your widgets. You're welcome. So, no, I didn't create the center widget, but the Flutter team did. So the center widget basically just centers your widget. And inside the scaffold, you have this body parameter, which basically represents the body of this white space over here. And you can add in a widget. All right, so let's go to the scaffold widget over here. And then right underneath our app bar, we can type in DODY and then put a colon. And then we are going to put in a center widget. And then let's put in a comma. And then inside the center widget, we will have this parameter called child. So a child basically is the widget that is inside this center widget over here. Yes, so and then we're going to add in a simple text. All right, so I guess the most common text or string that you usually use is hello world. All right, every tutorial they put hello world. All right, Hatari says, yeah, man. Okay, so once you added a text widget, which is centered in the center widget, you have your hello world text. So it's pretty simple. All right, so then the next thing is we are going to create a variable that is called number. Okay, so another thing that I never explained, sorry, is this underscore over here. So this underscore basically means that this variable or this name is private. So like if I'm not wrong, I guess in C# or Java, if you want to create a private variable or private object, you'll write the word private so that in other files, you cannot call the object that you've created in another file. But for Flutter, by just putting this underscore, the Flutter SDK will know that this is a private variable. So that's one like convenient way for you to create private variables or classes. Okay, so back to creating a variable. So in Dart, you can create variables in many ways, but we're going to create variable that is mutable, or mutable means that this data over here will be changed, can be changed. So the variable that we're going to create is a mutable integer variable called number with the value 0. So let's add in just right underneath our class object statement over here. So you can type in int and then type in the variable name, and let's add in the value 0. All right. So we are going to start our counter app with the number 0. So once that's done, the next thing is that we are going to add in the number inside our text widget. However, for our text over here, if you were to go back to Dartpad, if you were to go to documentation, right? So inside Dartpad, there is like two things, the console and documentation at the bottom left. So the console basically shows you like the errors or the warnings and whatnot. But for the documentation over here is where you can see the different parameters or arguments that is available inside the text widget. So it's a lot, right? So we're not going to focus on all of this, but we're going to focus on this string data over here. So the text widget would only need a string type of data. So if you were to put any integers, right, or non-string data, for example, number, then there will be an error. So for Dart, it is ahead of time. So that means it will compile it before you press run or before you compile the app, so that you won't have headache when you have bugs. So that's one cool thing about Dart. And then you could see the error here. It says that the argument type integer can't be assigned to the parameter type string. So it's pretty straightforward. Basically, you need to convert this number into a string. So is there a method for you to convert an integer to a string? Yes. So in an integer object, you have this toString method. So you see here, there's a toString and it returns us a string over here. So now you could see that this does not have an error. If you were to run this, you will see a number 0 over here. Great. So Dart has simple methods that you can use. I think other programming languages have it. I don't know. I never touch other programming languages except Dart. All right. So now you just need to put in the number.toString. All right. The next thing is we're now going to focus on our floating action button. So this 0 is very small. I'm going to change it later, but for now, let's focus on this plus button. So this plus button, if I were to press it, right, what we expect is this 0 to be number 1. So we just want to increment or add the number from 0 to 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a function, but first we are going to use this method called setState. So back to the topic of state, right? Only stateful widgets are allowed to store data, and also they are allowed to manipulate the data as well. So to manipulate the data and show it accordingly, we will have to use this setState method. So if I were to, for example, inside our floating action button over here, if I were to just, put in the number and then I will increment it by 1. So this is the increment syntax that I think is commonly used in most languages. So what this does is basically increments the value from 0 to 1, and then it assigns or the new value to the number variable. So if I were to run this, so technically it works. I mean, you can put a print method as well. So you can put in a number print method. So in Flutter, we have the print method. In JavaScript, we have console log. Yeah. So for Dartpad over here, for Dart, we have the print method because this type of what do you call this? It's a very common way for you to debug or to see whether things work. All right. So you just run this. And if you go to the console and then if you press plus, you see 1. And if you press plus, you see 2. Oops. So you see the console over here. Ignore the script error. Don't know why it has an error. But you see there is the number 1 and 2. But our text widget over here does not show the updated number that we have. So the only way for us to update our text widget is to use the set state method over here. So this allows us, or this set state, right? What it does is it notifies the framework, basically Flutter, that an internal state of object has changed. So it will say that to Flutter, hey, inside the on-pressed over here, there is this number being changed. So can you just, rebuild? So set state will basically rebuild the widget to show the updated variable. So now let's remove this print number over here. And then what we're going to do is inside our on-press, let's type in the word set state. Let's see if set state is present in the control space okay, it doesn't. Okay, never mind. So we just manually type in set state. So set state has its own argument, which is just an anonymous function. So inside the anonymous function, you can add in the number plus plus, right? So now if you were to run this, and then if you were to click on the add button, we should expect the number to be incremented. So now 1 and 2, okay, it's very, very small, but 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. So it's working. Great. So now we have made our counter app. It's pretty nice. So as you can see over here, this on-pressed has a lot of like brackets and colons and curly brackets. So there are many ways to refactor our functions. So there is one way is to use this single arrow expression. Yeah. So this basically is used when you only have one line of code. And then this is just like a synthetic sugar for return. So what you can do is you can just remove these curly brackets and then put in the arrow single expression. For single expression, you don't need a semicolon as well. So this is just dot. I think JavaScript has this as well in the new ES version. Then if you were to run this, okay, I really need to put the text, okay. Then this should work as well, right? So you could see that the numbers is increasing as accordingly. Yeah, ES6. Yeah, best feature. I agree on that. So then you can also even refactor it further like this as like such. So you have like arrow expressions here. So I'm just going to copy because I'm like lazy. So I'm just going to copy this line of code and then I'm just highlighting the whole on-press and paste it as such. So I guess it's good to have this kind of like refactoring, but for me, in terms of understandable code, or you could say clean code, right? If everyone understands your code, then I think it's good, but one line of code doesn't mean it's understandable. So I believe this is still kind of understandable, but make sure that other developers understand your code, right? So I understand that having less lines of code is better, but sometimes adding an additional line of code actually helps to understand. So it's just like that. Yeah. So we are also going to refactor this again. Other than having this on-press function over here, we are going to create our own function. So in Flutter, we are going to create this function, or I mean for our project, we're going to create this function called increment. So it's basically having set state to increment our number. So I'm just going to copy this thing. I'm just going to type as well. So at least I can be the same pace as you guys. Hopefully you guys are following. If not, that's fine. So type in void. So void is function type where it doesn't return anything. It's just a normal function. Then the next thing is we're going to put in the function name, which is called increment. And then we have our colon and curly brackets. then we will just highlight the set state with the syntax over here, just copy and then paste it as such. And let's put in a semicolon. Like for people who wants to learn this, it's a little bit confusing. That is fine. So it took me quite a while for me to get used of the syntax. So just highlight the increment method name. So I think this is the best part of Flutter, I feel, is that you can just put in the function name as such. So when you read the function, right, on press increment. So I think I really like how Flutter does it, or basically Dart, right? So once you run this, right, then you could see that it still works. So it is another synthetic sugar of Dart that allows you to just pass in the function name into the parameter of a widget. What is the brackets after on press for? Can add anything? Oh yeah. So that's a very good question from JW Tan. So what he said was, what is the purpose of these brackets? So can you put any arguments in it? So sadly, you can't. If I were to go to the documentation over here, the onPress is just a simple function that is a callback if you press on the button itself, right? So you cannot put any arguments. If I were to put any arguments, you could see that I will have an error. So the argument type void function dynamic can't be assigned to the parameter type void function. So in this on-press documentation, there is no argument inside this function method over here. So that's a very good question and observation that you have done. It is just a syntax that you have to follow. So any function that you use, you have this. So this is where you place your argument. It is the same as this. So you also can put it like this. So this is just what the onPress, because onPress is a function. So the brackets is basically a function syntax. And this arrow key is just a function syntax as well. And it's returning this function into the onPress parameter. Hopefully you understand. So it is the same as this as well. Yep. All right. So now we already increment. Okay. Now we're going to do some styling. So our text over here is very small. I apologize for that. I should have put this bigger. So I should have gone through this at the start so at least you guys can see visually. So inside our text widget, we have a style parameter that requires a text style object. And then inside the text style object, you have different properties that you can set. So the property that we want to set is the font size, and we're going to put it as 130. So let's go back to our Dart pad. And then one cool thing is that if you see any brackets, let's put in a trailing comma. So after every bracket, you just put a comma as such like this. And then inside Dartpad, you have format. So at least it will format for you. In Flutter or in any IDE, it will format for you once you save it. But for Dartpad, it doesn't have that feature yet, but that's fine. So now you could see that our text and our body widget, our center text looks nicer. So right underneath our number.toString, we can add in style. And then we can just pass in a text style. And let's add in the font size parameter. And we're going to make our font size 130. At the same time, let's put in a trailing comma as well. So if we were to run this, you could see that our number now becomes big. So if you were to increment, okay, finally, you can literally see without me zooming in, right? So inside text style, you have different properties that you can use. I mean, you can set. So you have like font style, font weight, height, shadows. There's a lot of things that you can use. So maybe color. So let me put in the colors dot, how about yellow? No, yellow is too bright. So let me put indigo, right? Since we are in the indigo theme, so you can just put in the color as indigo, right? So yeah, so it looks pretty nice. So you don't have to do a lot of design because Material does it for you or Flutter does it for you. But I guess one disadvantage is that if you want to do your own design, then you either have to find a workaround for you to do the designs, which is fairly okay unless you have designs that doesn't suit material design systems, so there's a lot of things that you have to see how you can do it. So but that's when you get really advanced inside the design of an app, right? So for now, I think you don't have to worry about design yet until you have a project, or if you're working, then you really have to know the different way of using widgets to create according to the design. All right, so I have like the whole answer sheet for you guys if you just came in, which is fine. So you can just copy and paste, and then you can put it inside the dartpad as well. I'm left with like 17 minutes. So I have a little challenge. So now I want you guys to create a decrement function. So basically create a function that's called decrement, and it decreases the number variable by 1. So once done, replace the increment function in the button to the decrement function. So what I mean by that is you probably like have to create another function that's called decrement, and it decreases the number by 1, and then replace this increment function into the decrement function. All right, so this is where I take a little break before I go through the answers, so at least you guys can try it out. All right. Then if you have any questions, put it inside the chat. I'll probably give you guys like maybe 2 minutes to do it. So in the meantime, I guess there is if you guys are interested in Flutter, there is an event that's happening on 3rd of January, February, March, where there is a huge update in Flutter. So if you guys are interested, you guys can put down in the calendar of this event. So 030321, right? So it is a interesting way for you to, not interesting way, but like it's gonna be, I guess, a huge event about Flutter. And yeah, if put down your calendar and see how it goes, right? And then you can follow Flutter Twitter account as well, right? Okay, so I guess 2 minutes is up. I'm sorry if I'm a bit fast, but yeah. Okay, so it's pretty simple to create a decrement function. Just basically copy and paste, and then you just swap the name decrement, and then put in the decrement syntax, and then put in the decrement function in the on pressed. So let me go through the answer. So inside the increment function over here, we copy, and then we paste it over here, and then we swap the in with the d, and probably the plus plus to a minus minus. And inside our floating action button, our on pressed will be a decrement. So then if we were to run this, so the number 0 over here, if you were to press the plus, it's a bit weird, but it's supposed to be minus. I mean, decrements are still minus minus. So I guess you can also put in the icons remove. And then if you were to run this, it will look better. Yes. So now you see that our widget, text widget, is according to our icons. It makes sense basically. So now you have created a counter app that can increase and decrease our number. So lastly, what if we want to increase and decrease our app? I mean, what if you want to increase or decrease the number, right? So then we'll probably have to create a simple UI change. If you were to look closely, there is 2 buttons now instead of 1. So you will have 2 buttons where it increase and decrease. So this layout is called a row. So there is a widget that is called row, and the widget row allows you to display the widgets or the children widget in a horizontal array, so from left to right. So in order for us to create a row widget, we will have to wrap our floating action button in this row widget over here. For me, I'll just copy and paste, because let's do that. Just highlight this whole row over here. Okay, I highlight the whole floating action button. And then if I were to go to our floating action button, make sure you highlight the floating action button and paste this. And then if you were to run this, you can see that now our action button is all the way to the left and it's being cut off. Why is that so? So for the row, right, there is this thing called the main axis size. So currently the main axis size for the row is taking the maximum width of the screen size. That's why the floating action button is all the way to the left, right? Because it just expands and any widgets inside it will always go to the left. So that's the starting position of the row children widgets. So how do we then make this floating action button to go to the right? So we're going to, what's the opposite of max? Minimum, right? So maximum, minimum. So we're going to put in the min axis size to a minimum. So we can just go back to our row over here. And then just above our children parameter, you can type in min axis, press Control space, and you see the min axis size over here. And then we can type in min axis, axis size, space, and then we're going to put minimum. So if we were to run this now, our row will actually take the minimum size according to the children widget. So beforehand, the row is taking up the width. Now the row is taking up the space of the floating action button and is now rendered according to the where it's supposed to be, which is on the right. Now we can add another floating action button. So we're going to add it like such. So we can just add it below and it will look something like this. So we can just copy this floating action button over here and then paste this below. And then we can swap the increment, the second floating action button. So I'll put here increment. So in Flutter, to create a comment, you can put in the double slash. So this is the increment button, and then this is the decrement button. So at least we know which is the increment and decrement. So then we can just put in the decrement and then change the icons to remove. And now if you were to run this, you could see that there is now two buttons. So now if I were to click on the plus button, it will increase. And then if I were to click on the minus button, it will decrease. Now I'm a fan of design. So this is ugly. Why is this two buttons close together? So we need to have a space in between. So anyone here likes beautiful apps? I know what you mean. Then how do we then create a space between these two floating action buttons, right? So we want to add in a simple sized box. So the size box over here has a width of 10. So this will make a simple space in between here. So what is a sized box? So as from the sized box word, it is basically a box with a specified size. So it can take the width, it can take a height. So it's just like normal spacing. All right, so we're going to add a sized box. So type in sized box. And then we are going to put in the width. And we're going to put in the width at 10, right? So if you were to run this, now you can see that the button is spaced nicely, which is great. Now we can just increase this and decrease this as well. Let's make it better. Do I have time? Okay, I got 7 minutes. All right. So let's make it better. So now we want to change this counter app to this app that says, this is how much money I have. This is very accurate according to my bank. Maybe you guys can relate. But yes, I mean, yes, okay. We're all broke, right? So, so hopefully, I mean, this counter app can increase the money in our bank, but yes, maybe in the future when you guys are developers, you guys gonna have a lot more money, right? Okay, so I see a lot of people, I don't like this picture. So now we are going to use another layout widget that is called column. So the column is a widget that allows us to display our children widget in a vertical array. So vertical means up and down. So we are going to then create these two widgets in our centered widget over here. So I'm just going to copy as such, or you can copy this whole body widget over here. We're going to add in our text widget, which have the string, this is how much money I have. And then we're going to put our number string over here. So we're just going to copy this. And then inside our dot pad over here, we are going to paste this in our body parameter as such. It's okay if it's ugly. We can format it. So it will actually format ourselves, and then it will run this. And then you could see that now our text widget has been pushed up to the top. Why is that so? So for layout widgets, there is this thing called main axis alignment. So main axis alignment is just another fancy way of saying which position to get started. So the position of the column to get started is top. So inside Flutter, it doesn't say top, it says start. Because this main axis alignment dot start is also can be found inside our row. So it is just like an easy way for us to understand where's the start, but you have to kind of remember. So for column, it usually starts at the top. For row, it usually starts on the left. But we want our column widgets, our children widgets to be in the middle. So how do we do that? Well, we can make use of this main axis alignment to be center. So let's go back to our Dart pad. And then inside our column over here, let's press enter, type in main axis, press Control space. Then you see the two suggestion. So we're going to click in main axis alignment, and then we're going to type in main axis A, and then Control space. You see the different alignments that you get suggested. So you have center and space around, space between, space evenly, and start. So for column and row, the default main axis alignment is start. But for our current situation, we want it to be at the center. So if you were to run this, now you can see that both of the text widget are now centered inside our counter app. So it looks so much nicer. Now, the last thing that we have is to put in the $sign. So this is called string interpolation, basically just combining your variables into strings or combining two different types of data into a string. So there is many ways for you to combine strings. So for Flutter, to do string interpolation, you need to have to use a $sign. So if you want to use the $sign, you have to use this slash, right? So we can do this by adding. So let's go to our second text widget over here. And then we're going to add our string. So backslash and the $sign. If I were to remove the $sign, you could see that now it has an error and it says expected an identifier. So identifier is just another word for variables. So in order for you to just say to Dart saying that I'm going to use the $sign as a string, you just have to put in the slash. And then you can just add to the current string that you have. And then if you were to run this, now you can see that the $sign will render just beside the 0. Then you can just increase and just add until you feel that this is how much you have left. All right, so there's many different types of string interpolation. So there is this way, which I prefer. Basically, it's readable. You can make it to one whole string. So for string interpolation, you can just put in the $sign and the variable name. So we're going to put in number. So the thing is about string interpolation for Dart is that you don't have to use the .toString because it will just convert the variable to a string data type. Then if you were to run this, you could see that it will just render accordingly. All right, so I don't want the space. So if you don't want the space, right, it actually reads well, something like this. So that it will render the $sign with the number variable just beside. So what if you have a method in your, for example, this is not a variable, but this is an instance of an object and you want to access the property, right? So you can make use of these curly brackets. So if you were to use like a method for an object instance, then you will use these curly brackets. So what you can do is you can put the curly brackets, just put a curly bracket as such. And then you can put a toString method. So control space, and now it will work. So if you were to run this, all right, so now you have your text widget that is rendering according to the number variable and the $sign here. So I have the full source code inside this is a gist GitHub. So if you want to have the full source code, which I think is fairly simple, there is the link over here. So I guess that's about it for this. Oh, just nice at 1 hour, 30 minutes. So I have free courses online. So if you want to learn more about that, I have this beginner course on programming and coding fundamentals. It's a Udemy course. It's free. So you guys can just go ahead and learn. And then if you want to learn more about Flutter Web, so not only Flutter can create mobile apps, Flutter can create websites. So there is this backend that we usually use for Flutter developers called Firebase. So Firebase is a very commonly used, I would say, service, not a backend, but it's you can say backend service. So Firebase has many different type of services like Firestore database, which is also a very common database that a lot of Flutter developer use. And then Firebase also has like Firebase storage where you can store your images. And then Firebase also has Firebase authentication so that you don't have to, think about the nitty gritty of how you want to authenticate a user and such. So Firebase is pretty easy to use. In some way, it is pretty easy to use if you are used to using personally, it's easier than AWS. AWS is a lot, but Firebase is simpler, I would say. So these are the free courses that I'm giving to you guys. So one is in YouTube. This Flutter Web Firebase in 1 hour is in YouTube, and this is in Udemy. So that's about it. So I will use these 30 minutes left to answer your questions. So if you have any questions, please type down. You can literally ask me anything. How much I earn? No lah. Okay, so Liu Man Hong, how do we deploy the source code into our phone? That's a good question. So I should have my VS Code on. Okay, so you need, first of all, to install a lot of things. So you have Visual Studio Code. I have the Flutter thing over here. So if you want to run it in your phone, so you have to connect your phone to your laptop that is running the Flutter app. So I have created a video about it actually. Let me check. It's a bit laggy. So there is, but you have to follow. It depends on which phone you are talking about. But if you were to connect it to your phone from your laptop or your desktop, your Flutter IDE will actually show what devices is being connected. So I have Visual Studio Code over here. This is the app that we are using. So inside Visual Studio Code, there is like different devices that is connected to VS Code. So I have mobile simulator. If I were to connect my iPhone, it will show iPhone as well. So then, you have to download VS Code and Flutter SDK, and then you will just have to run it from there. All right. So you need to download the SDK and IDE and connect your phone to your laptop or desktop through a wire, and then you can run it from there. Okay, next question from JW Tan. Is there a button function that I can hold the button and the money keep increasing? Yes, there is. So currently the button over here, you have to click a lot. So there is this thing called gesture detector. So let me Google for you, gesture detector. If you want to have different gestures, for example, swipe left, swipe right, or like 3 drag up, 3 drag down, 2 fingers drag up, whatever, right? So there is this gesture detector where it will handle all of the different gestures or user actions. So there is a long tab. So if I'm not, let me find long, so there is a long press callback. So let's click on this. So long press callback is basically when you long press, then you will just keep on running the function. So a gesture detector, you could think of it as like a empty container or a empty box that detect any gestures that you have. Then you will just pass in the function accordingly. So for example, over here, turn lights on. Let me see, what is this? Is it playing the video? Okay, I don't know. Okay, so for example, you see this gesture detector over here. Switch this on tab to, for example, on long tab or on, what's this? This is on long press. Yeah. So you just switch this to on long press, and then you have to have your child widget to be a container widget, not a button widget. And then you can, set state, and then you just increment as such. Right. Okay. All right. So that answers the question. So next, Amir Mustakin asks, do you prefer VS Code or Android Studio? So I actually have used both, but I rather use VS Code because Android Studio is I feel like it's very restrictive, even though there's a lot of features that you can use in Android Studio. But for VS Code, for me, because I just need what I need. So I don't require a lot of things or extensions inside my VS Code. And I feel like VS Code it gives me more control rather than Android Studio. But it depends on what you want. So if you do a lot of Android development other than Flutter, like you do Android like in Java or Kotlin, then you probably better if you use Android Studio. If you are just like you use it for website development, app development and whatnot, right? Then VS Code, it's better, I would say. But personally, this is just my bias. I will rather choose VS Code. All right, Muhammad Tariq Ali asked why we should use stateless widget first, then continue with stateful widget. All right, so stateless and stateful widget, the difference is that one, we can change the data. So stateful, you can change the data, while stateless, you don't really do anything with the data. So there is no preference between stateless and stateful widget. Use the widget that solves the problem. So the problem or the feature that we are creating is we want to control the number in our counter app. So we need to create a stateful widget to store our variable over here that we are changing. So for stateless widget, right, it can be like this text widget over here. So you can create like a stateless widget that only returns the text, and like this is how much money I have. So it really depends on what widgets you want. Yeah. So there's no sequence of which you need to choose. Basically, what is the problem that you need to solve, or what is the feature you're building, and see whether the stateful widget or the stateless widget is the one that can solve it for you. All right, so next, Wong Chi Hong asks, why would someone don't use Flutter? If Flutter is so powerful, why Kotlin and Swift still exist? Now, that's a good question, and that's a very common question as well. Or Siddharth answer, Flutter is cross-platform, so you should use Kotlin if you're working with lower level services. Okay, so thank you, Siddharth. Yeah, sorry if I mispronounced your name. I do agree that Flutter is cross-platform, but Flutter, Kotlin, and Swift are powerful at its own right. So Flutter, it is cross-platform. I would say personally, Flutter is good if you are like a young or a startup and you don't have a lot of people working on your app and you want an app to run on iOS and Android. So you would rather hire someone that can build an app once and then deploy for the two platforms. That's where I believe Flutter is helpful. But if you want to use, the, what do you call that? The framework for the individual platforms, then it's probably used when you have like a team, like for example, an Android team, iOS team inside the company. So that's where the company has budget for two teams. And yes, Kotlin has more low-level control. Swift also has lower level control as well. So these are the advantages. But I would say Flutter also is able to talk to the native platforms using, I forgot what it's called, platform channels. So you can just write Dart code, and then you can also talk to the, for example, the Kotlin code of the Flutter app, So one good thing about Flutter is that you can talk to low-level services using Flutter. But it really depends on what the business or what the business is trying to solve, right? And what the situation is. So if it's a big company, then if you're able to afford a separate team for an individual platform, why not, right? But it really depends. Kong Bun Hui asks, do you recommend using Block or Provider for larger projects? I don't have a lot of experience in Block. I do have some experience in Provider, and large projects also depends on what kind of large projects, you know. So personally, for me, I would say that it really depends on who started the architecture for the project and what kind of state management you're using. So Block can be good, Provider can be good as well. For me personally, I've used Block and Provider when I was working, and I rather use Provider because it's easier to understand and less boilerplate. So I'll rather use Provider. But if your team uses Block and if they think it is the best way, then go for it, right? So it always depends on the team. As much as I like Provider, it really depends on what is the use case that you want to, resolve. So advantages and disadvantages of Block and Provider, I would say like Block is a lot more boilerplate, but it really controls the different parts of the app cycle, kind of, while Provider is simple and yeah, it gets its job done most of the time. Yeah. Passenger, I don't know if that's your real name, but Passenger asks, how to establish connection between Flutter app and database. Establish connection between Flutter app and database. I mean, there is packages that's already created. So for example, if you want to have a SQF Lite database, there is a package for you. If you want to have Firestore database, there's a package for you. So if you want to check out pub.dev, it is where you can find the Flutter packages. So if I were to put SQL, is it SQL Lite or SQLF Lite? I forgot. Yeah, SQLF Lite. So there is a package for you. Yeah. So you don't have to create from scratch, So there's packages that you can rely on. Amir Mustakin asks, is it learning Flutter Firebase enough to publish an app? Yeah, it's actually enough for you to publish an app. You don't even have to learn Firebase to publish an app. You just need to learn Flutter. It can be hard-coded data, doesn't matter, right? And then you just publish an app through Google Play Store and Apple App Store. Yeah. So you don't really have to learn Firebase. You can just learn Flutter. I would say the experience of you pushing the app to the Play Stores is more important because there's a lot of things that's another skill that you have to learn other than building an app. So how to connect to MySQL? Same thing, just go to pub.dev and then you can type in MySQL. And then there is a library for you as well that you can use. So it's this MySQL one. So it's a package for you. So I think even though Flutter is pretty new, I would say it's still new, even though Flutter has been like stable for 3 years, 2 years. There is still packages that, like for example, this MySQL is published last year. Oof. So I would not trust this at all. It actually depends, but we'll see how it goes, right? So perhaps you can write an API MySQL one. Yeah. So any more questions? I still have like 15 minutes. Okay, so any advice for beginners learning Flutter? So it really depends on your coding experience. So first of all, you have to tell yourself why you are learning Flutter. So for myself back then, when I was learning Flutter, I wanted to get a job. So in order for me to get a job, I need to have a nice resume or some skills or some projects that I can showcase to employers that I'm able to build an app. So what I did was I just go through a tutorial on how to build a quiz app. And then after that, I was lucky enough that someone approached me on LinkedIn. And then I met up with my ex-employer. Then I showcased that I can build a Flutter app. And then back then, I didn't have a lot of coding experience. Then he hired me as an intern. And then I was able to like build the Flutter app, and then I was then converted into a full-time developer. You really must know why you want to learn Flutter. Then that's where you have your different steps for you to learn. If you want to learn for fun, then you can just follow tutorials. There's a lot of tutorials that's free out there. But for me personally, if you want to get a job in Flutter, I would really highly recommend you to build an app that you are solving your own problem. Like, for example, you want to solve a problem of like waking up, so build a alarm clock app. It doesn't matter if it's like not 100% your code, but just build it and then publish it to the App Store and Play Store. And that's where the employers or future prospect employers or recruiters will be looking at your resume and like, oh, okay, this person actually built an app and it has deployed it in the App Store and Play Store. So at least you know that you have the skills to publish an app and build an app, right? So that's one advice for learning Flutter. And just don't give up, because as much as a lot of people say that Flutter is amazing, Flutter is easy to understand, there are times where you have a specific use case that you might not have the answer in Google or Stack Overflow or in GitHub. So just don't give up, take breaks, and then, just carry on. All right, Sean Liu asks, can Flutter collaborate with Python to publish kind of machine learning app? So there is actually an app, TensorFlow, TF Lite. Yeah, so there is TensorFlow Lite plugin inside Flutter that you can use. There is, I remember there was one app where they use TF Lite or this some sort of package for you to recognize face or detect your face. So you are able to use TensorFlow plugins, but Python to publish kind of machine learning app. What do you mean by collaborate with Python? If you mean building a Python backend to build a machine learning API, then I mean that's straightforward. You can just build a backend using Python to create your machine learning models and then return the data accordingly. But now there's so many models that's already created by big companies like, TensorFlow, that's by Google or Microsoft. You don't have to create it from scratch or whatnot. Yeah, so there's a lot of like plugins for you to play around with if you want to do machine learning app. If I'm not wrong, there is like a Udemy course for like machine learning data or algorithms or whatnot. Yeah. Any more questions? What is the requirement to get GDE title? That's a good question. Honestly, I don't know. I guess, okay, I not say I don't know, but how to be a GDE? Let me Google for you guys. Okay, so actually I've answered this question before. There's a lot of steps for you can take. So I really like, his name is basically the Fireship.io guy. He wrote an article on how to be a Google developer expert. So I really like how he conceptualized what are the different steps to become a GDE. Personally, for myself, I didn't intend to be a GDE. I just really like Flutter. I created a YouTube channel to teach Flutter. I just like talking about Flutter. So I go to meetups, whether it is from, like, for example, the student clubs or developer student clubs or like Google developer group meetup or even like local meetups. I just talk, like if there's an opportunity to do a tech talk, I will just go and then talk about like Flutter. Most of the time it is introduction to Flutter, because a lot of times people don't know Flutter and whatnot. So yeah, so I guess in summary, there is this nice quote. Where is it? Basically, like if you don't plan to become a GDE, you tend to become a GDE, if that makes sense. Yeah. But I mean, definitely you can work your way up to become a GDE. You can basically do networking, you do events, you can talk to people in Twitter, have a YouTube channel, create very good Medium articles or articles online, basically gathering a lot of attention for yourself as well. But usually people who are passionate about the tech or Google tech are people who usually are scouted to become a GDE. All right, hopefully that answers your question. Muhammad Tariq asks, how many apps you already created? Oh, can you be more specific? I have created a lot of apps that I have not published. If you go to my YouTube channel, I have created like very simple apps that's not like full-fledged published kind of apps. But like full-fledged kind of apps, I guess is one, because it's my previous employment, which is the period tracking app. That's the full-fledged where I really go through the backend, the cycle of like getting the design from the designer and then creating it from the design, and then after that testing it. Back then we don't use code test, which is bad. We use manual testing, meaning that we just ask our colleagues around to test the app, which is highly not recommended, but it's just a startup thing. And then after that, push to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, right? Yeah, so that's the only full published app that I've done. And getting a job experience, whether it is an internship or a full-time position, right, it will actually help you understand how a company, whether it's big or small, works. Because a developer is just a person who's able to convert the business problems into code or into tools that is being needed, right? So think of yourself as a problem solver. So I have made many apps that I've never published, but I've only created one app that's published. Yes. Right. Any more questions? Right. So I think we are done. So I guess thank you guys for listening to the workshop. Hope you guys understand most of it. If you don't, then you can follow me on Twitter, I guess, and then just tell me what you have problems with your Flutter learning journey, right? Yeah, so it is going to be the end of the year. Have a happy advanced new year. So hopefully you guys enjoyed your 2020. And yeah, that's about it. So I'll see you guys in next year, I guess. All right. So goodbye, guys. Thanks for joining. Have a nice night.